I, like many of you, have been assaulted over and over and over again with the horrifying images of the murder of Irina Zarutska, who was murdered by DeCarlos Brown, who is the suspect in the case, whilst on a public train in North Carolina. I think that was at the end of August. We have been drip-fed over the past few days the images that have been coming out of this. Slowly but surely, we've had little snippets of the video and some still images that have been shared about, and now the full 18-minute video is available on social media. I'm not going to show any of it. I have watched enough of it. It is horrifying and tragic to see the final moments of this young girl's life taken for literally no reason. And I think that's one of the reasons that this has been so shocking to many people, which is, in a sense, it's similar to the incident that happened last year in Southport, where Axel Ruder Cabana murdered a number of young white girls for absolutely no reason. This was DeCarlos Brown, a black man, murdering a white woman on the train, no provocation, no incident. In many of these cases, there are at least some political factors that can be pointed to instigate this. In many of the bombings that we've had in England, they have a motivation that is religious and or political. In some of the incidents like the murder of David Amos, similarly, it could be argued there was a religious or political motivation for it. This was just a young girl, 23 years old, steps onto a train, sits down, minding her own business, relaxed, not paying attention to the dangers around her, stabbed, murdered, gone. For no reason. Like that. And I think that's one of the reasons that this has been so shocking to people, was the senselessness of the incident. And many people have been trying to point to non-racial reasons for this incident happening. The fact of the matter is that this is a racial incident. This cannot be classified in any other way other than a racial incident. Many, like CNN, have spoken about how DeCarlos Brown suffered from schizophrenia, which exacerbated this, and how he'd been in and out of he'd been arrested and charged 14 times, which is definitely very relevant to this case, which is why he was on the streets, is because he was let out by a judge. He was allowed to roam the streets by a judge. But
one of the dimensions that makes this case so awful is that it's so obvious what should have been done to prevent this, right?
Yes, it is a problem with the system, which I'll get onto in a moment. And of course, schizophrenia and all that does exacerbate his likelihood of committing violence. But the fact of the matter is, this is not a lone incident. This is something that plays out across all cities in America, wherever there are racial divisions that meet with one another. Violence necessarily erupts in sometimes the most senseless manner. And it is horrible to think of it this way. I don't like thinking of it this way. You probably don't like thinking of it this way. But the fact is, it's been racial as long as I've been born. It's been racial for long before I was born. Anytime there has been an incident over the past 10 years, and you can go back to George Floyd, you can see Daniel Penny and the persecution that he had to undergo. You can go to Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, any of these people. In Britain, you can go back to the 90s with Stephen Lawrence, and even before that with the Brixton riots in the early 1980s. They've always made it racial. These are not the terms that I wanted. These are not the terms that I was brought up with. I was brought up to think that if you made it racial, then that was the greatest crime imaginable. But we know that immediately after this crime was committed, that he was caught on the camera, which recorded the entire incident audio as well, that he was saying, "I got that white girl. I got that white girl." And you might be able to say that, oh, well, he was just pointing out a descriptive factor. But no, whether or not he was schizophrenic, he chose his target.
I don't think it, given the nature of crime in the United States and the massive overrepresentation of black on white murders, basically, which is not reciprocated the other way around, just to be clear, we can piece together that perhaps there is a problem in the United States of black people hating white people and wanting them to die, basically.
And of course, that's not all of them.
Of course.
I don't want to say that this is every single person. There are plenty of good people out there of all heritage and backgrounds, but we can't ignore the facts. We can't ignore that this shocking image is something that has deeply upset myself and many other people, because America is simply at a further stage along. The cities of America are simply a few steps ahead of where the rest of the West is going. People of the same background as DeCarlos Brown are flooding into our countries and flooding into our cities, and many, like myself, are seeing the fate of this young girl and the horror and terror of her last moments, and seeing that could be my daughter, that could be my wife, that could be my mother, that could be my sister, that could be anybody that I care about. Not to mention the fact that her life in itself had value. She was a Ukrainian refugee. She'd fled a war zone. Frankly, she probably would have been safer staying there. She came there expecting to be safe, and she wasn't. And what was the situation immediately after it happened? What was the reaction to the people around her who also were not white? Confusion, amusement, just sat there, wondering, oh, what's going on? And you can see the blood. None of these people leapt into action.
Total apathy.
There was no Daniel Penny there to save her. Daniel Penny, who was dragged through the courts, a big public show trial that thankfully he managed to come out of the other side of without going to prison, for preventing a situation like this. Daniel Penny prevented a situation like this. When you have a maniac, insane black man on a public transport system saying that he's not afraid to go back to jail. He doesn't care who he takes with him. He's not afraid to die. You do what Daniel Penny did. You protect the people around you. And this poor girl had nobody around her to protect her. She didn't even have anybody to call the police straight away because they just sat there.
One has to wonder whether these people would have done the same were it a white guy assaulting a black person.
Oh no. We know what happens in that situation.
Oh, Charlotte would be burnt down.
Charlotte burns in that situation. But that's not what happens. The mainstream media ignored it until they couldn't anymore. This was just something that was supposed to be forgotten. But we won't forget. We shouldn't forget. This is an image that you can't see right here, but caught on the camera. Part of it was that there was some guy just stood at the side filming. I don't know what would compel somebody while a girl is bleeding out and other people are trying to help to just stand there filming her last moments.
It's one of the darkest realizations of the times we live in, that someone could murder you in cold blood and there'd be people around you so indifferent to your suffering that they'll pull out their phone and record it, presumably to put on like social media for their own benefit.
Sick.
So it's like constantly being surrounded by vultures at all times. You don't know, when they're going to swoop down and pick your bones clean, but it just ruins the feeling of being in a place, doesn't it, when everyone around you is just out for themselves.
Yes. And again, there are other factors in this, such as the fact that he had schizophrenia, but that kind of ignores the fact that there was a massive systemic aspect to this as well. And we've heard so much about systemic oppression, systemic racism, systems that cause this or that kind of problem for the poor minority communities. That was the whole reason that Britain had to upend its policing system in the late 90s after the Stephen Lawrence report, was the supposed racist, internalized racism and failings of the police system that refused to convict the people who presumably killed Stephen Lawrence, even though that was more to do with the lack of evidence that they would have been able to convict them with. We all know about how the system has failed so many people. Well, how about the fact that the system failed this young girl? The fact that this man was arrested and charged 14 times, still allowed to roam the streets. How about the fact that he had a brother who it's been found out through this old news report from about 13 years ago, who also shot somebody Shot some random guy in the face. So there's a family history of violence here. What a surprise. What a surprise. Just shoot another guy in the face. Why? Who knows? He wanted to steal his phone. Guess he's got to die for that. A common story.
I think this hits particularly hard for me as well, because my little sister, my younger sister at the minute, is in the Carolinas in the United States. And I was just thinking, well, that could have been my sister. And it makes me worried, actually, obviously. It's like, wow, is it really as bad as this? Is she going to be safe?
People are feeling the same.
And I imagine if you live there,
I worry
even worse, yeah.
This sort of thing is coming to all of us, unless something can be done to stop it, whether that be remigration in Western countries or whether it be something like severe policing of ghetto communities in America. People like to go on about how the drop in crime in the cities of America in the 1990s could be explained by this factor or that factor, say about how they took the lead out of fuel and lead might have been causing an excess of violence in the 1980s. None of them like to point to the fact in 1994 Bill Clinton passed a huge crime bill that massively increased policing in cities. They don't like to point to the most obvious factor. They try and come up with some abstract reasoning here, some esoteric theory there, when really, perhaps, it's just policing criminals that might solve some of these problems in America.
I find the attempts to remove the agency of the people doing it really disgusting and distasteful, in the sense of, it's like, oh, that these people are doing it because of lead in their water. Really, they're a victim. It's like, are you for real? You think that any amount of lead in the water is going to lead you to do this sort of thing? I don't think so.
It's grasping.
Mm-hmm.
It's grasping when the answer is obvious. Obvious to everybody. But no, instead now we get the system that lets men like this just walk the streets. Walk the streets. Judge Teresa Stokes, the woman who, at the beginning of this year, let him walk the streets, come up with all sorts of excuses, but the fact of the matter is, as far as I'm concerned, if he's been arrested and charged 14 times, including for threats, robbery with dangerous weapon, felony larceny, that perhaps this is a man who's better off of the streets, especially when he also suffers from schizophrenia. This man was a risk to all around him. He was a ticking time bomb. And sadly, this girl was the victim of that. The victim of a system which is not built for some people, that can't work with some people, that isn't blind, and we know that it's not blind, or Derek Chauvin wouldn't be sat in a prison cell right now over trying to restrain a man who overdosed on fentanyl underneath him. Justice isn't some kind of neutral participant in this, as much as people would like to try and suggest that it is. And we can see, again, well, what happened in the local county, Mecklenburg County in North Carolina, where this happened? Well, 5 years ago, $3.3 million was donated from a left-wing NGO to safely reduce the jail population. Are they also going to be, should they be held accountable for it?
Yes.
I would argue yes.
Yeah, absolutely. These sorts of people are complicit in these sorts of crimes, right? Like the same people who say refugees welcome and then a refugee murders someone. Well, you facilitated that, didn't you? Because it wouldn't have been the case otherwise. And people have to be held accountable for what they're arguing for. If I said, we're going to introduce alligators into schools and then children start getting bitten, I think it would be fair to hold me accountable. Why then, when it's other people that we're talking about, is it any different? Especially when it comes to keeping people safe. I think that all other consideration should go out the window when the safety of your own citizens is in question.
Absolutely. And then there's the other aspects of this. These are somewhat unsubstantiated, so if this gets corrected at a later date, I apologise, but there are allegations going around at the moment that the judge involved in this both has some kind of director of operations position in a mental health services, a clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina, so some are suggesting that she might be trying to direct some business that way. Of course, those are allegations, unsubstantiated as far as I can tell right now, but there are also allegations going around that she may have never passed the bar exam. According to some, And according to people who have consulted with Grok, if you actually check for yourself on the bar registrations in North Carolina, her name doesn't show up, which would seem to suggest that perhaps she was put into that position through affirmative action or some other kind of leg up service that is provided only to certain types of people. And that's again another reason that this has to be considered racial, is because the entire system is set up in a racialized way to disadvantage whites.
Would she have released him all those times were he of a different ethnicity to herself? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
I don't think so either. The fact is, the system put him on the streets, and the system probably knew, the people in the system knew that he would do something dangerous. Maybe they didn't think that it would be quite so bad, but they knew that he was a risk to others. He'd already committed violent crimes. He was schizophrenic. Of course, put in the wrong situation, he was going to do something that would hurt somebody. And it's not about socio-economic factors either. This isn't something that can be explained away through poverty or a lack of universal health care. This is a fundamental problem. This isn't about rehabilitative justice. As far as I can tell, he had been given some kind of rehabilitation, some kind of medical care. Didn't work. It didn't work. You can't fix this. This is about the powers that be wanting there to be chaos and murder in the streets. They want you to be scared. They want you to be unsafe. They want you to be in danger. The system made this happen. Therefore, the system is broken and it needs to change. And it's up to the powers that be in America, people like, as much as I'm critical of him, people like Donald Trump, who is in the ultimate position of power to do something like this right now, to try and bring peace back to the streets of American cities. Because it may not be the kind of large-scale rioting and burning down of the streets that we saw in 2020 during the George Floyd riots, but still, there is a low level of murder and chaos going around every single day, and we're starting to see it here as well. There needs to be somebody who can rein in that power, and at the moment, the only person who's in that position is somebody like Donald Trump, who released this video speaking about it, saying that we have to be vicious just like they are. It's the only thing that they understand. We can't allow these violent repeat offenders to continue spreading destruction and death. And he has threatened to send in the National Guard into Chicago, the same way that he did with Washington, D.C. And people aren't going to like it. There's going to be some people who are saying that this is an overstepping of power, but if you want there to be an actual country to live in, then somebody needs to use executive power to do that.
It's long overdue, if anything. I mean, there needs to be a thorough clearing out of Chicago. It's an unacceptably dangerous city. And all you're doing by being soft on the people that are making it that way is punishing everyone else. There are the means to fix these problems, and they should be taken. You shouldn't have any mercy for murderers. I don't. You shouldn't have any mercy for people who are randomly violent, because they're awful people. They don't deserve mercy, and that's how justice should work.
And it shouldn't be considered some kind of exacerbating factor to not put them in prison if they're not in control of their own faculties. If they have such a lack of control that they are not able to stop themselves from randomly murdering strangers in the street, that's more of a reason to lock them up. That's more of a reason to inflict capital punishment on these people and to fast track it. Do not have them waiting around in a cell at taxpayer expense for up to 20 years. That's the average span people spend on death row as far as I'm aware. No, that is a waste of people's money, purely for the sake of a system that exists to get these people off and into your streets. No, it needs to be fast-tracked.
The entire prison system is predicated on this faulty assumption that people can change as well. And I'm personally not convinced. And, you know, obviously I've spent an enormous amount of time studying psychology, and I don't really ever see any evidence of people getting better. You may remember that guy I covered that went on the Joe Rogan podcast saying how he was reformed and how...
Oh, I remember him. And then find a decapitated head in one of his apartments or something.
Yeah, in a freezer.
Yeah.
And that was a month later. and when he was talking about the importance of rehabilitation and giving people second chances.
Who was the organisation behind that as well that he was representing? He was on there with a representative who try and use very, very flimsy DNA evidence 20 years down the line on cases to try and exonerate people who were clearly
and get the wrong
guilty.
people
What was it? The Innocence Project.
That's it, yeah. Irony there.
The Innocence Project, who had been heavily funded by a load of celebrities after George Floyd, who decided that they wanted to donate money to making sure that these people are back out onto your streets. But that's neither here nor there. Again, this has been quite radicalizing for a lot of people. Elon Musk, who, again, I have had my criticisms of, keeps skirting the line with these things as more and more incidents like this happen and more come out like this. Responding to Andy No, who was pointing out that the killing of Irina was far more brutal than George Floyd's death and should be met with a far more severe reaction. Elon Musk says they don't understand what's coming, but they will. In response to Matt here pointing out, posting one of these screenshots, he said this has been happening at scale in South Africa for a long time. And then he also started posting graphs pointing out the differences between crime rates on race, this one being the murder rate by race. This is all stuff that you cannot ignore.
And also the fact it goes up dramatically around 2020, well, we all know what happened, right?
Yes.
So the most feasible explanation to this is that it was racial resentment motivating that dramatic increase.
Yes, but interestingly enough as well, this is the murder rate by race. The victim rate by race also went up for blacks at about the same rate, so they just began killing each other.
As is often the case.
As always happens. But again, we weren't raised to think like this. I was born in the 90s. I had the post-90s ideological framework pushed on me when I was younger. I wasn't raised to think like this. I was raised to be colorblind, anti-racist, all these things. But the fact is, reality hits you smack hard in the face. And you begin to recognize that there are differences that can't be ignored. And there are some people who try and excuse this. There was this guy, Van Jones, who, by the way, said explicitly that he wanted the white majority of America to go to a minority, and that's what they like. He came out defending this, trying to excuse it, sweep it aside, saying that the man who stabbed Irina Zarutska was hurt people.
Disgusting.
Is there any planet where any timeline where this man would be making the same arguments for anybody who wasn't of the same race as him? No. Obviously there wasn't. There are the typical idiots saying that this is the natural response to 400 years of white oppression. What about the past 70 years in America of black on white violence? Of the cities going up in flames every few years because the media decided to report on some police incident that before body cams everybody just assumed was racist for the sake of it. Remember when Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, that all came out and they waited months to release the police body cam footage because as soon as everybody had it, they went, oh, clearly this guy overdosed. He still went to prison for it. So what should our natural response to this be? It's an open question. There is the selective empathy of some people, like this guy, Evan loves botting his posts, saying there are 50 murders in this country every day, and these people only care when it fits their narratives. Well, I've got a good guess at who's committing those murders every single day, again and again. Who could it be? Whoever could it be? And then he says that, the real solution would have been if you implemented my ideological framework onto the world. Then this wouldn't have happened. Because if you'd just given this guy free healthcare, he wouldn't have murdered people.
Right.
When pressed,
his ideological framework seems to be whatever can maximise harm to white people. Every time.
That's always the way. That's always the case. Of course, when pressed on this by Carl, he says, yeah, basically, maybe he shouldn't be in society. He would probably need to be in some kind of asylum. I agree. if that was the most peaceful solution to it, then yeah, he should have been anywhere that gets him off of the streets. But that's interesting that even when pushed on this, some insane progressive like this has to admit that, yeah, maybe there are some people who shouldn't be out in society. Maybe if you're a 14-time, you've been arrested 14 times and charged 14 times and you're schizophrenic and you've already committed violent crimes, maybe you shouldn't be on the streets. Maybe that's something that we can actually all agree on.
There are some people that are just incapable of ever being a contributor to society. They can only be a burden.
Yes, and even worse than the usual suspects that we expect to see on the left, there were people on the right who, for a brief moment, about 12 hours a couple of days ago, decided to try and almost find some kind of moral excuse for it by posting this picture of a girl that we don't know who this is, but everybody claimed was Irina, laying on a bed in a room that had a Black Lives Matter poster on the wall. Like, even if this was her, which we don't know, it doesn't seem to show up on any of the social media that she had that anybody uncovered, that would somehow almost justify it. The idea that, oh, well, she supported it, so she gets what she deserves. Women, don't they just vote and think stupid, guys, huh? No. That's not how this works. If you think like that, you are morally reprehensible. And anybody who tried to share this around to almost excuse what happened, to have a laugh and say, well, what goes around comes around, that's sick. You should be ashamed of yourself.
What I said about this when I saw it going around was that she was a Ukrainian refugee. She couldn't be expected to know the nuances of America when she'd only recently arrived there and came from Eastern Europe, which doesn't exactly have the most contact with American culture of anywhere in the world. So I think that people should perhaps be a bit more charitable, even if it was true, right? And the actual picture itself was cropped, and it looks like it was someone else's room anyway.
It was somebody else's room. There are other people in there. It's not actually her room. And also, similarly, we don't even know if this is her. The hair looks different. The parts of the face looks different. Most of her face is in shadow. But people were still spreading this far and wide to make sure that you know that, well, I mean, what comes around goes around. No, that's not how we do things anymore. We recognize that this is something that's coming to all of us and threatening all of us. It doesn't matter if your sister is an idiot shitlib. It doesn't matter if your mum is a boomer who has 60s opinions on things. This is coming to all of us. We don't get to be selective in that way anymore when this is what's coming to our towns, to our cities, to our shires and villages. Again, people were pointing out this is not even potentially her. It's not on her social media anywhere. So please calm down. And then again, to return to the facts of the situation, according to the actual figures that we get on interracial violence that happens in the US, 84% of white victims are killed by white offenders, and for cross-racial, whites kill blacks at 1.25 per million whites. Black kill whites at 13.8 per million blacks.
And of course,
statistically, that's an insane difference.
It's a massive overrepresentation, isn't it?
Especially when you consider the population difference overall represented within America as well. That is insane. And it shouldn't be ignored.
Well, it's a problem that I think people have ignored, and it's really quite frustrating because the trend has been talked about for quite some time, and all it is basically moral cowardice. You know, very few people are willing to put themselves out there and say, listen, we can see what the problem is, and it's specific to a specific demographic targeting white people, basically, because it makes them sound bad.
I've seen more than just that one person I already highlighted trying to laugh this off and say, well, we don't care about you. Okay, then why should we care about you? Why should all of our efforts across not just America, but Europe as well, Britain, why should all of our efforts be directed to make you comfortable, to pay for your welfare, to give you housing? Why should we care? If this happens and you laugh. And again, this isn't everybody. I want to be absolutely clear that I'm not speaking about everybody, but it is a worrying overrepresentation of significant portions of these populations. And it is terrifying to consider, because this is one of countless stories. Over and over and over again, we see the same thing. Even just 4 days later, Jared Taylor here pointing out, Caitlin Stratt, 17 years old, Louisiana, shot to death, unprovoked. Who killed her? This guy. This guy. You have pointed out, in London, shockingly, we have remarkably similar statistics than you see in America. Black Londoners making up 13% of the population, but responsible for 61% of knife murders and 63% of gun crimes. And that is statistics given to us by the Mayor of London himself.
Yeah, that was Met Police statistics.
That they were posting about because they wanted to have some kind of community gathering where they made sure that we need to tackle this problem, but not by policing anybody, but by raising awareness of it. Like, that'll do anything. By the way, did you guys know that you kill a lot of each other? Yeah. Now what? Are you going to do something about it? You need to. Some of these people need to go away, whether that be to their home countries or whether that be to prison when you begin to actually police their neighborhoods. And let's remember as well that the statistics that the FBI has are probably already massively skewed, seeing as there is a terrible, terrible trend of people being classified as white when they are picked up, when they clearly aren't. So the real figures are still being hidden from us. Because we can't even imagine the true scale of what goes on. Is this guy white? Does he look white to you?
No.
No. No, he doesn't.
Well, that surname, no.
Does this guy look white to you? Because apparently, according to the people who picked him up, yep, he was. So how does that tip the scales, do you reckon, when we do these statistical analyses? When we look into who's actually committing what murders? Is the situation even worse? Clearly. And finally, this has been a problem going on years. This is an article from Time all the way back in 1958, and it is the same problem. What were the statistics back then? 10% of the US population, 60% of the arrests for crimes involving violence or threat of bodily harm. Forced integration failed. The Civil Rights Act failed. Affirmative action failed. Now what?
Who are the men that pick for scraps amongst the ruins at the end of history? You should know, because you encounter them every day. Between the towering buildings of a fallen empire, we find the Fellahin, the historyless men, who know nothing of the turning of the cosmic wheel and find themselves outside of civilization itself. Cut loose from the great chain of being, they represent the loam into which our dying culture will return. That is, unless we choose to take up the burden once again. This Fellahin condition is the subject we explore in issue 4 of Islander magazine, on sale while stocks last and available worldwide at shop.lotuseaters.com.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.